The coffee shop smelled like burnt sugar and something close to peace, and that was the only reason Lena had stayed in this town for 6 years. She told herself that every morning when she unlocked the front door of Birch and Bloom, flipped the sign from closed to open, and watched the first regulars shuffle in from the cold Portland sidewalk. She told herself that when she refilled the espresso machine and wiped down the counter and pretended she wasn't counting the days until her daughter's 7th birthday, she had built something here, a life that made sense. One she could point to and say, "Look what I did, alone, with nothing." But the thing about a life you build on top of a wound is that the foundation is never quite level. Lena was 31 years old. She had a 7-year-old named Rue who liked to collect smooth stones from the park and line them up by color on the windowsill. She had a coffee shop with good bones and loyal customers and a back room that still needed new drywall. She had a best friend named Cassie who worked Tuesday and Thursday mornings and brought homemade banana bread every single time without being asked. She had, by most reasonable measures, a full life. What she did not have, a name for Rue's father on the birth certificate, health insurance that wasn't one catastrophe away from collapse, the ability to hear certain songs from 2017 without her chest seizing up. And she most definitely did not have a plan for the morning. A black SUV pulled up in front of Birch and Bloom, and Callum Voss stepped out of it. It had been raining since Tuesday. The Thursday crowd was slow, the kind of slow where you could hear each individual raindrop hit the window. Lena was behind the counter, steaming milk for a cortado, when the bell above the door rang and the cold came in with it. She didn't look up immediately. That was the first mercy of that morning. When she did look up, she thought, wrong person, some mistake of the light. Then her body knew before her brain caught up. Her hands kept moving. Keep moving, don't stop, the milk will scorch. But something deep in her ribcage recognized him the way you recognize a weather pattern before the storm arrives. Callum Voss, 6 feet 2 inches of controlled quiet, wearing a dark coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was shorter than she remembered. There was a scar near his jaw that hadn't been there before. He was looking around the shop with the careful, scanning expression of a man who was never truly off duty. And then his eyes found her and he stopped. Just stopped, like someone had cut the power. Lena set the milk pitcher down. Slowly, the cortado was not going to be her best work today. "You have the wrong place," she said. Her voice came out steady, which was nothing short of miraculous. Callum Voss hadn't moved from the doorway. The rain dripped off his coat onto the mat. He was looking at her the way people look at things they've convinced themselves they'd imagined. "Lena," he said, just her name, like it was a question he'd been sitting with for years. "We're actually pretty busy," she said, gesturing vaguely at the 3 people in the cafe, none of whom were paying any attention to this. "I just need 5 minutes." "I don't have 5 minutes." He stepped inside anyway. That was Callum, always had moved through the world as though the rules of it were suggestions made by other people for other people. She'd found it magnetic once. Now she found it exhausting. Cassie appeared from the back with a box of paper cups and took one look at Lena's face before looking at Callum and back at Lena again. She had the social intelligence to say nothing, set the cups down, and suddenly become very busy with the pastry case. "I'll go make that cortado," she said quietly. "It's all ready." Lena started. "I'll make another one." Lena came out from behind the counter because she was not going to have this conversation across a bar top. She crossed her arms. Callum watched her do it, and something in his face changed, just slightly, a fraction, like the adjustment of a compass needle. "Okay," she said. 5 minutes. Talk." She had met Callum Voss at a gallery opening in Seattle that she'd only attended because Cassie had begged her and she'd run out of reasons to say no. This was 2016. Lena was 24 and running the coffee counter at a hotel downtown, saving up to open something of her own, living in a 3rd-floor walk-up that had a radiator that sounded like a dying animal every November. He had been at the gallery with people. There was always, she would come to understand, people around Callum. Associates, assistants, men who stood at a slight remove and scanned rooms in a way that made your shoulders climb toward your ears without you knowing why. He'd come to get coffee from the bar she was manning, which had been a tactical error on the event organizer's part, putting a coffee bar at an art opening, and he'd said, unprompted, "The Tanner piece is derivative." "Of what?" she'd asked. "Basquiat, mostly," with a gesture toward Sheely that I don't think he earned. She'd looked at him fully then. "You sound very confident for someone holding a cup of hotel coffee." He'd smiled. It transformed his face entirely. That was the thing about Callum's smile. The rest of him was so composed, so deliberately still, that when something moved through it, the contrast was almost physical. "You're the one making it," he'd said. They'd talked for 40 minutes. He'd come back to the bar twice. At the end of the night, he'd asked for her number with the directness of someone who didn't see the point in pretending he wasn't going to ask. She should have known then. She should have looked at those quiet men by the door and understood what they meant. But she'd been 24, and he was sharp and funny and unexpectedly gentle in ways she hadn't anticipated, and the particular loneliness of her life at that time made her generous with her heart in ways she'd later have to reckon with. They were together for 14 months. She'd found out who he was, really was, around month 4. By that point, leaving felt like tearing something she wasn't sure she'd survive tearing. Callum Voss was not in organized crime. Exactly. That was the word he used, always with a faint emphasis on organized, as though to distinguish his world from something messier. What he was, the man who held the financial architecture of the Pacific Northwest underworld together. Investments, shell companies, arrangements between who needed clean hands and clean records, and someone who could think 8 moves ahead. He was the infrastructure. He was the reason certain things didn't fall apart. "I don't hurt people," he'd told her once, very carefully. "You make it possible for people to be hurt," she'd said. He hadn't argued with that. She had stayed anyway. That was the part she found hardest to explain to herself, even now. She had stayed because he had been honest with her in the specific way of a person who decides that one person will receive their truth even if no one else does. She had stayed because she had loved him in the sharp, inconvenient way that doesn't wait for good timing. She had stayed until the night his world came too close, too physically, undeniably close, and she understood that staying meant drowning. She'd left while he was in Vancouver for what he called a meeting, and she'd learned to call something else. She'd taken her car and her savings and her chest full of secrets, and she'd driven south and then east and then settled in Portland because it had coffee culture and anonymity and a park near a good school district where a child could line stones up on a windowsill. She'd found out she was pregnant 3 weeks later. She had considered, for exactly 6 days, telling him. Then she'd thought about what his world was, what proximity to it meant, what it would mean for a child who couldn't choose it yet, and she had made the hardest decision she'd ever made in her life, and she had kept it. She had told herself it was the right choice so many times that it had become load-bearing. "How did you find me?" she asked him now. They were standing near the window. The rain had gotten heavier. It's the first question. Answer it. A pause. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters whether I need to move." Something crossed his face, something painful. "I'm not here to." He stopped, recalibrated. "I'm not here in any professional capacity, Lena. I came because I needed to see that you were." He looked around the shop, the blackboard menu, the hanging plants she'd put up last spring. The photo Rue had drawn of the 2 of them that Lena had taped to the register, because Rue had presented it with such ceremony that she couldn't put it anywhere else. "I needed to see that you were okay." Lena followed his gaze to the drawing. She felt her heart do something complicated and unwanted. She should have taken that drawing down. She should have. "Is that yours?" Callum asked. His voice had changed. It was quieter. The drawing was 2 stick figures. The taller one had curly hair and an apron. The shorter one had big eyes and was holding a stone. In Rue's handwriting at the top it said, "Me and Mama. I have customers," Lena said. "There are 4 people in here, and 2 of them are on their laptops. Callum, Lena." His eyes moved back to her. How old? She could lie. She had run the calculus of this lie for 6 years, reinforced it, sealed it, memorized the exits. She knew exactly how to deflect this question, but she was 31 years old and she was tired, and he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before, something unguarded and almost frightened, and she had spent so long being strong about this that for one undefended second she just couldn't. 6, she said. Almost 7. The silence lasted long enough that Cassie took 3 steps toward them from across the room before Lena shook her head slightly, and she stopped. Callum was very still. He had gone the particular still of someone doing math they don't want the answer to. Lena, don't. Is she? I said, don't. I need you to tell me. She looked at him. She had loved this man. She had loved him in the full, stupid, committed way that you only love someone when you're young enough to think love is sufficient. She had grieved him for a year after she left. She had built her entire life in the negative space of his absence and told herself that was the same as moving on. Yes, she said, she's yours. He didn't leave. That was the thing she hadn't prepared for. In all 6 years of imagining this conversation, she had always scripted him leaving. Shocked, maybe. Angry, possibly, but leaving, because his world didn't have room for the kind of ordinary, irreversible reality of a child who collected stones and asked too many questions about why the sky changed colors at sunset. Instead, he sat down at the small table by the window, the one with the wobbly leg she kept meaning to fix. And he sat there for a long time with his hands wrapped around a coffee Cassie had silently placed in front of him, and he looked out at the rain. Lena kept working. She had to. There were drinks to make and a delivery of oat milk in the back that needed to be unpacked, and she was not going to stand still long enough for the enormity of this morning to land on her all at once. She doesn't know, she said, passing his table. It wasn't a question. How would she know? Callum said. You left. I know why I left. I know you do. He wasn't accusing her. That was the strange part. His voice was flat with something that might have been understanding. I'm not here to argue about that. Then what are you here for? He looked at her. I don't know yet. At 3:15, Rue came through the door. She did this on Thursdays, walked from the elementary school 2 blocks over, let herself in with the little key Lena had put on a purple lanyard, and installed herself at the corner table with her homework and a snack and total unself-conscious contentment. It was the part of Lena's day she organized everything else around. Rue was 6, almost 7, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stillness, that uncanny quiet she'd had since infancy, the capacity to simply be in a space without demanding it. She had a backpack covered in iron-on patches she'd chosen herself, and a habit of narrating her thoughts out loud when she was working through something, which Lena found both exhausting and completely wonderful. She came in, shook rain off her jacket, spotted her mother, and then because she was 6 and had no protective instincts yet, no reason for them, looked directly at the stranger sitting by the window. Hi, Rue said. Callum looked at her. Lena had moved, without realizing it, to a position slightly between them. Old instinct, her hands were at her sides. Hi, Callum said. His voice had done the thing again, that fractional change. What's your name, Rue? She tilted her head with the particular gravity of a first grader who has decided to assess an adult. What's yours? A pause. A real one. Callum, that's different, Rue said with the frank judgment of someone who hadn't learned to cushion opinions yet. I like it. She turned to her mother. Can I have the almond croissant, or is it the last one again? It's the last one, Lena said, but I saved it for you. Rue's face produced a smile of pure, simple joy. She went to her corner table, pulled out a book and 3 smooth stones from her jacket pocket. Why 3? There were only 2 this morning, and arranged herself as though the rest of the world had ceased to matter. Lena made herself look at Callum. His eyes were still on Rue. He was doing the thing she had known he would do, that quiet, intense cataloging, looking for himself, finding it, the set of her jaw, the stillness. She watched him understand. He asked if they could talk, properly, not in the cafe, not in front of Rue, not with Cassie making increasingly loud noises about inventory in the back room. Lena said she'd think about it. She spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about it and trying not to think about it and making too many drinks with too much foam and nearly spilling oat milk on a customer's laptop, which would have been a whole other disaster. At closing time, when Rue was in the back room doing homework with her noise-canceling headphones on because she'd discovered she liked them, Cassie sat across from Lena at the counter and said, with characteristic directness, So that's the guy. Don't. I'm not saying anything. You're saying things without saying them. Cassie put her chin in her hand. He sat here for 2 hours and drank 1 coffee and watched you work like a man watching a sunrise he can't get back. I'm not saying anything. I'm just observing, Cassie. He left his number with me on his way out. He said to give it to you when you were ready. She set a business card on the counter. It was plain, just a number, no name, no company, nothing. Clean hands, even now. You don't have to do anything with it. Lena looked at the card for a long time. She thought about the birth certificate with its blank space. She thought about Rue asking last spring, with the sudden directness of a child who has just figured out that some things have been left out. Mama, do I have a dad? She had said yes, and that it was complicated, and Rue had nodded slowly and gone back to her stones, because 6-year-olds will only push so hard, and Lena had felt relief and guilt in equal measure. She thought about the weight she had been carrying for 6 years and how it didn't actually get lighter. She had thought it would. People told you that time did that, but what time had actually done was make her stronger, which was not the same thing at all, and now she was carrying the same weight but with better muscles, and sometimes she couldn't tell the difference between strong and exhausted. She picked up the card. They met at a park the following Sunday morning while Rue was at her friend Dottie's birthday party. The singular convenience of children's social calendars. He was already there when she arrived, on a bench near the duck pond, looking profoundly out of place in his expensive coat among the joggers and dog walkers, and a pair of elderly women doing Tai Chi with unsettling precision. Lena sat at the other end of the bench and looked at the ducks. You could have told me, he said. I know. I would have. I know what you would have done. She looked at him then. That was part of the problem. He was quiet for a moment. He looked older than she remembered. Not badly older, just honestly older, in the way of someone who had made a lot of decisions and was beginning to take stock of them. I've been thinking about leaving Portland, leaving what I do. She looked back at the ducks. One of them was having a dispute with another about something she couldn't identify. People in your position say that a lot. I know. A pause. I mean it. You may mean it right now. I've meant it for a while, before Sunday, before finding you. He said this carefully, like he knew it could sound like a line and wanted her to know it wasn't. There were things that happened 2 years ago. I won't go into them. But I had a year where I thought very seriously about what I was leaving behind by staying. He glanced at her. I thought about you. She didn't say anything. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking you to forgive me for the things that made you leave. I'm not asking you to trust me or feel anything or go back somewhere we were. I know how much time has gone by. His voice was steady, but the steadiness cost him something. She could see the edges of it. She's mine, and I would like to know her, if you'll let me. If you decide it's safe. If you decide I've earned it. He paused. I know I haven't. I'm not claiming I have. Lena thought about Rue, about a little girl who had her father's stillness and her mother's eyes, and no framework yet for what her particular origin story meant. She thought about the question that would come, that was already coming, in fragments. Mama, do I have a dad? Mama, where is he? Mama, will I ever? She thought about what it would mean to let him in, the risk of it, the shape of the fear. She also thought about something Cassie had said once, late at night after too much wine, when Lena had been going around and around the question of whether she'd made the right choice. There's no version of this that's without pain, Len. The only question is what kind. I'm not making any decisions today, she said finally. Okay, and I'm not making them for you. I'm making them for her. I understand. If you ever bring any part of what you do within reach of her, I will disappear so completely you will never find either of us again. I've done it before. I'll do it again. I know you will. And the way he said it, not threatened, not resentful, just honestly respectful, was the first thing in 6 years that made her think maybe, just maybe. I spent 3 months finding you. I know what you're capable of when you decide to go. She almost laughed. Almost. One condition, she said. Name it, you actually leave. The other thing, if this is going to be anything, if you're going to be someone she knows, you're not that person while you're in her life. A long pause. The duck argument had been resolved in favor of the larger duck. The Tai Chi women had moved on to something that looked more like jazz hands. "I've already started," he said. "It takes time. There are things you can't just." He stopped. "A year, maybe 14 months. I can be out in 14 months. She stood up. The park smelled like wet grass and something flowering she couldn't name. "Then you have 14 months to figure out how serious you are." He stood too. They were facing each other, and it was strange. Not bad strange, just the deep strangeness of someone you had loved returning to your life in a shape that matched neither memory nor imagination. "Lena," he said. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. He nodded. He looked at the duck pond once more, as though he was committing the whole unremarkable scene to memory. The ducks, the Tai Chi women, the wet bench, the specific latitude and longitude of this ordinary Sunday. "I'll be in touch," she said. "I know," she said. "That's what I'm afraid of." She picked Rue up from Dottie's party at noon. Rue was sugar-drunk and triumphant, clutching a goodie bag and wearing a party hat she refused to remove. She talked without stopping for the entire walk home. About the cake, which had been pink with raspberry filling and 6 layers, about a game they'd played, about a caterpillar she'd found under the picnic table and released into the bushes because she didn't think it would be happy in captivity. "Mama," she said, somewhere around the 3rd block, "do you think caterpillars know they're going to turn into butterflies?" Lena looked at her daughter, at the party hat, at the goodie bag, at the small, serious face looking up at her, waiting for an honest answer because she could always tell when she was being given a soft one. "I don't know," Lena said. "I think maybe they just know what they have to do next, and they do it." Rue considered this. "That's good enough, I think." She took her mother's hand and they walked home through the rain, which had slowed to the kind of mist that turns streetlights soft and makes the whole city look like it might be dreaming. Lena did not know how the next 14 months would go. She did not know what Callum Voss would turn out to be when the armor of his world fell away, whether underneath it there was someone real enough to be a father, or just the echo of the person she'd once thought she knew. She did not know whether she was brave or just tired, whether this was the right choice or just the one she was making because all the others had become impossible. What she knew was this: her daughter was holding her hand. The coffee shop would be open tomorrow morning. Somewhere on her kitchen windowsill, there were 14 smooth stones arranged in a careful line from lightest to darkest, which was Rue's preferred order, because Rue believed things should make sense if you looked at them the right way. She was 31 years old, and she had built a life out of will and coffee and love she didn't always know what to do with. And for the first time in 6 years, she let herself think that building wasn't finished, that maybe it was only just beginning.